He was the mohawked warrior who turned cage fights into must-watch spectacles. Chuck Liddell didn't just compete in the UFC, he defined it during its climb to global prominence. With a steely gaze and fists like sledgehammers, he dominated the light heavyweight division with an eerie calm, dismantling legends and filling arenas like a rock god. But in the brutal world of combat sports, even icons rarely get poetic endings. Chuck lingered too long in the octagon. Now, at 54, his story has taken a somber turn. His speech is halting, his body worn down, and the fierce fighter fans once idolized now moves through public life as a faded echo of his prime. He gave everything to MMA, but the sport moved on without him. This is the heartbreaking decline of Chuck Liddell, how glory faded to silence, how triumphs gave way to crushing losses, and how a cage legend became a stark reminder of why some fighters can't retire until the damage demands it. Long before he was headlining pay-per-views and starring in highlight reels, Chuck Liddell was a scrappy kid from Santa Barbara with a fire in his gut and a knack for violence. Born on December 17, 1969, Chuck grew up in a turbulent home, raised by a single mother alongside 3 siblings. His father was gone early, leaving Chuck, the eldest, to step up as the family's shield. Life wasn't about wealth or comfort, it was about survival, and for Chuck, survival meant fighting from a young age. By 12, he was training in Koikan karate, a disciplined, unforgiving style that shaped his raw intensity. Chuck wasn't a natural at structure, but he was hooked on combat. In high school, he excelled in football and wrestling, earning a reputation for brawling outside the classroom as much as studying inside. At Cal Poly, where he wrestled at the NCAA Division I level, he earned an accounting degree he'd never use. His true schooling came in California's gritty gyms and dive bars, where bare-knuckle fights were as routine as sunsets. After college, he dove into kickboxing and landed at John Hackelman's Pit Gym in San Luis Obispo. There, the Iceman was forged, not just a nickname, but a persona. Chuck didn't taunt or boast. He didn't need to. His cold stare and brutal knockout spoke louder than words. When the UFC called in 1998, Chuck didn't get a red carpet. He debuted at UFC 17, outlasting No Hernandez in a gritty decision. The sport was raw then, no glitz, no corporate sponsors, just blood and chain-link cages. Chuck thrived in that chaos, bringing a striking style that broke every rule. Hands low, chin up, he dared opponents to swing, only to counter with devastating hooks. His fights didn't just end, they punctuated. Yet no one could have predicted this stoic brawler would become the face of a sport on the brink of extinction. The early 2000s were MMA's wild frontier. The UFC was bleeding cash, banned in many states, and dismissed as barbaric. It needed a hero, and Chuck Liddell, whether he wanted it or not, was about to become one. From 2001 to 2004, he carved a path of destruction, outclassing icons like Vitor Belfort and Renato "Babalu" Sobral with lethal precision. His 2004 knockout of Tito Ortiz in a heated rivalry became one of the UFC's biggest draws. The mohawk, the icy stare, the DMX walkout, they weren't just details, they were a brand. Fans ate it up. What made Chuck magnetic wasn't just his knockouts, it was the danger he courted. His low hands defied logic, but that was the genius. He lured opponents in, then struck with predatory timing. One punch, sometimes two, and the fight was done. The crowd roared, and Chuck walked off, expressionless, as if he'd just clocked out of a shift. In 2003, he faced Quinton "Rampage" Jackson in Japan's Pride FC and lost, exposing cracks in his armor. But that loss only fueled a more gripping story. Chuck wasn't untouchable, he was human, and that made his comeback epic. Back in the UFC, he knocked out Randy Couture at UFC 52 in 2005, seizing the light heavyweight title before a record-breaking crowd. He didn't just hold the belt, he owned it. Over the next few years, Chuck crushed Jeremy Horn, Babalu Sobral, and Tito Ortiz again, each knockout more legendary than the last. His fights drove the UFC's biggest pay-per-views. His face graced billboards, his name echoed in rap lyrics, and he popped up on Entourage and late-night talk shows. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a phenomenon. But in combat sports, the higher you climb, the harder you crash. And Chuck was nearing the peak, unaware the ground was about to give way. At his zenith, Chuck Liddell ruled the light heavyweight division like a warlord. The UFC, revitalized under Zuffa, built its empire around him. The mohawk, the beard, the knockouts, he was a living legend. After claiming the title against Couture, he went on a rampage, avenging losses and settling scores. His knockout of Horn was personal. His rematch with Babalu lasted 95 seconds. And at UFC 66, his second demolition of Ortiz smashed pay-per-view records with over 1.1 million buys. Chuck wasn't just a star, he was the UFC's heartbeat. But fame brought shadows. Chuck was everywhere: red carpets, club openings, beer commercials. The Iceman was now a cultural icon, but the grind of celebrity dulled his edge. Training camps grew sloppy. Sparring got reckless. Whispers of late-night partying spread. Chuck later admitted he wasn't always focused during those years. He didn't feel the danger yet, he still had his power, his chin, his belt. Until he didn't. In 2007, at UFC 71, Quinton "Rampage" Jackson returned for their rematch. This time, he didn't just win, he erased Chuck. The image of Liddell crumpled on the canvas shocked the MMA world. The Iceman had melted. But Chuck didn't retreat. Months later, he fought Keith Jardine and looked sluggish, outmaneuvered in a split-decision loss. No knockout, just a quiet unraveling. Then came UFC 88 in 2008 against Rashad Evans. Chuck hunted for his signature right hand, but Evans landed first, a thunderous overhand that dropped him stiff. The crowd didn't cheer, it gasped. The myth of the Iceman was crumbling. Still, Chuck pressed on. At UFC 97 in 2009, he faced Mauricio "Shogun" Rua. He landed early, flashed his old fire, then crashed again. Shogun's flush shot sent Chuck sprawling into the cage, another knockout, another gut punch image. UFC President Dana White had seen enough. "I don't want him fighting anymore," he said. "I care about him." But Chuck wasn't ready. Fighters fight, he insisted. To him, stopping wasn't an option, it was surrender. Fighting wasn't his career, it was his soul. RS, Vegas Benders. When the fight stopped, so did the cash. Whispers of failed businesses and legal battles surfaced. Chuck never confirmed the struggles, but the signs were there. Then came the comeback talk. Dana was livid, absolutely not, but Chuck didn't need UFC permission. Other promoters, hungry for headlines, were ready to cash in on his name, even if it meant risking his health. The 2018 Golden Boy MMA fight against Tito Ortiz was a disaster waiting to happen. At 48, Chuck hadn't fought in nearly a decade. His chin was shot, his reflexes dulled. He looked like a ghost of the Iceman, slurring words at press conferences, struggling with questions. Tito, younger and sharper, didn't gloat, he didn't need to. On November 24, 2018, in Inglewood, California, the fight unfolded like a funeral. Chuck moved sluggishly, his punches telegraphed. Midway through the first round, Tito landed a clean right hand. Chuck collapsed, eyes vacant. The silence in the arena was deafening. Fans, fighters, and analysts called it tragic, exploitative. Even Tito seemed shaken, offering quiet respect post-fight. Chuck shrugged it off, "I had fun, but the truth was undeniable. The Iceman was gone." Life after the cage hasn't been kind to Chuck Liddell. The 2018 Ortiz fight was his last, leaving him to navigate a world without the roar of the crowd. He tried reality TV, made sporadic UFC appearances, but each time, fans noticed the toll. His speech slurred, his movements slowed, his spark faded. Financially, things unraveled. A 2020 divorce from his wife, Heidi, with whom he shares 2 kids, added personal strain. Failed ventures, a cannabis brand, clothing ideas, a podcast, never took root. His UFC executive role was long gone, and Dana's public praise masked a strained relationship. Chuck's social media tells a lonely story: solo workout clips, shadowboxing in empty rooms, no team or gym around him. He gave his body, mind, and legacy to MMA, but the sport has little room for him now, not as a coach, commentator, or even a celebrated veteran. That's the tragedy. Chuck Liddell built the UFC's foundation, but when the lights dimmed, he was left in the dark. Chuck Liddell remains an MMA titan. His name is etched in the sport's history, a pioneer who fought when it was still a fringe spectacle. To older fans, he's the knockout king who floored Ortiz, Couture, and Sobral with chilling focus. To newer fans, he's a warning, a legend who stayed too long, his highlight reels now tinged with sadness. Unlike Georges St-Pierre, who retired pristine, or Khabib Nurmagomedov, who built a new legacy, Chuck got no grand farewell. His exit was forced, not chosen, marked by knockouts and silence. Now, in 2025, Chuck lives quietly, far from the octagon. The Iceman name still carries weight, but it's a weight of loss. He trusted his durability too long, fought past his prime, and when the sport begged him to stop, he couldn't. Chuck Liddell is a monument to MMA's raw era, bold, unbreakable, but weathered by time. Not because he failed, but because he gave everything to a sport that couldn't give it back.